Welcome to the Origin Science Scholars. This is our sixth evening with the first of our three-part series on human origins. Our series is brought to you by the Institute for the Science of Origins, a partnership of Case Western Reserve University, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and IdeaStream, with the assistance of the College of Arts and Sciences and the Museum of Natural History, and the generous support of Richard Morrison. Tonight's lecturer is Dr. Bruce Latimer, Director of the Center for Human Origins, a partnership of Case Western Reserve University and Cleveland Museum of Natural History. Dr. Latimer has appointments in the departments of anthropology and anatomy at Case Western Reserve University, and we're very pleased to have him for the first of our three-part series on human origins. Dr. Latimer.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks very much. He's right. We did get in last night about 4 in the morning, and I have to tell you, so if I'm a little groggy, please give me a break on that one. But I have to, I reached in my car today, and I grabbed my blue blazer, and I grabbed it, and I came up here, and I went out there, and I put it on, and I thought, gosh, this feels a little snug today, you know? And I reached in the pocket, and I pulled out his tie. So I said to him, is that my coat you're wearing? He goes, yeah, I thought it felt a little large. So that's how we started out. And I apologize for my voice. It's a little ragged because I'm getting over a cold. And what is more, I talked to literally tens of thousands of kids about science this weekend. What a phenomenal example, or what a wonderful thing that was. Unbelievable. And one thing about that, we had taken reject Lucy casts. See, there I am a little tired. Lucy casts, things that you couldn't use for research and you can't sell them, and we use those to let the little kids dig in this sandbox with matrix, which is really kitty litter. So they would dig in this matrix and they'd find these bones, and they'd go up to a picture of Lucy and figure out which bone it was. And they had a great time doing it. Well, there was a man watching me. He was standing there for about 10 minutes watching and watching, and then he finally came up to me and he goes, "Are those really Lucy casts?" And I said, "Yeah, those are really Lucy casts." And he goes, Can I buy them?" No, you can't buy them. We're the only game in town that has real Lucy casts. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is about Ardipithecus. And I'm not going to do what I would normally do, which is to go into the really nuts and bolts and the details about Ardipithecus. If you want me to do that later, I'm happy to do it. Gosh, no, I can do it. But I don't want to do it today. I'm going to talk about why Arty is so important. Because she really is important. And that's what I'm going to get to. And I'm going to talk about something called a paradigm shift. And you know, most people, when you ask them about science, what do they think about science? Well, they think it progresses in slow incremental progressions, and it gets better and better and better. That's not how science works. The way science works is it proceeds in fits and starts, in these big punctuated events that cause chaos in the field. And that happens because either there's a genius that comes up with a new model, and we have to figure out how to take the existing data and fit it to the new model. That's the Darwin and the Einsteins and the Newtons. Or we find new material, new evidence, then we have to create a new model to incorporate the new evidence. There's the two things that make it happen. And I'm going to tell you something else. Humans are resistant to change. And people are reluctant to change their basic premise and their basic models. Boy, are they ever. So you're going to hear more and more about Arty, and it's going to take decades to sort this one through. But Arty is one of these paradigm shifts in human evolution. And it's one of the ones where the evidence is no longer can be incorporated within the existing paradigms and the existing models, and we have to create a new one, and that's where we are right now. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Now, one more thing, and then I'll move on. Take a look at that. It's not a surprise that he's holding a human skull. We're the only animals, we're the most intelligent animals in the universe as far as we know, and we're the only ones on the planet that can ask the question, who are we, where do we come from, where do we fit into nature? And that's an important thing, because how does the human mind work? I'm just going to take a little aside for just a moment. Let's talk about the human brain. It's 2 to 3% of your body weight, and it takes 20% of your energy. It's an enormously expensive organ to carry around on your shoulders. Why do we have it? Why do animals have a brain? Well, short of just running your basic metabolic processes and keeping you alive, we have this thing called a neocortex on top of our brain. And why do we have that thing? Well, I'm going to tell you why we have that thing. That little bundle of neurons, little bundle, it's 100 billion plus neurons, that allows us to do something that is very peculiar. You know what it is? We can tell the future. I know you're thinking, boy, Latimer's gone off the deep end this time. He's doing a Nostradamus on us. No, I'm not. What I'm saying is we live in a universe that is patterned. I can tell you right now, tomorrow the sun will be there. Now it's dark. I can tell you that it's fall and soon it will be winter. And I can tell you if the carnivores go down to the water at night to drink, don't go there. And if you want to find a certain kind of a fruit to eat because you like it when it's ripe, well, you can remember that. Those are all patterns. So the brain is a pattern recognizer and enables us to predict the future on the basis of patterns. Now, sometimes things are random. Yeah, sometimes there are volcanoes. There are earthquakes. There are tsunamis. There are meteorites. There are things that you can't predict. So your pattern organizer doesn't like that. It really upsets it. You know what we do in that case? We make up a story. We make up a nice story. And that's what we do because that makes us feel better. Well, I'm going to talk about that too. In human evolution, we've been making up stories for a long, long time. Because there's three ways to tease out human evolution. Three ways. We got three tools in our toolbox. One is comparative anatomy. That's inferential evidence. One is direct evidence in the form of fossils. And the third is make up a story. And there it is, folks. In 1912, we didn't have much in the way of fossils. Darwin did all his based on comparative anatomy. But we didn't have any fossils, so they looked around and they said, what makes a human unique? Well, they looked at the big brain and said, yeah, you got a big brain. Then they said tool use, well, that's an extension of the brain. And then we walk upright. So they created a model, and I don't fault them. They triangulated off this model of living animals because they didn't have any fossils. And they said, why do humans, what makes us unique? Well, they said, it must be the big brain. So in 1912, in a quarry outside of London called Piltdown, a guy named Dawson found this. And this is perfect. This is perfect. This is a skull that has a human-sized brain and an ape face. Hey, there you go. That's how it happened. A human-sized brain and an ape face. They took an orangutan's jaw and a human skull, put them together and said, that's human evolution. Not surprisingly, it was found in England. And I say not surprisingly because it has a really big brain. But it's a hoax. It's a complete hoax. Someone made it up. And that's what the reconstruction of Piltdown looked like in 1912. Now, that guy could walk off the campus of Oxford or Cambridge. And that's what everybody thought. That's the way it must have happened. Oops, paradigm shift. 1924, this man, Raymond Dart, who studied in England and then went to South Africa to develop the anatomy department at the University of Witwatersrand. And he was down there, and a student of his brought in this little piece of breccia. Came out of a cave. And once he cleaned it up, that's what it looked like. Came from a place called Tong. Now, here it comes. You remember Piltdown, and everybody believed Piltdown at this point. This is exactly the opposite. It has an ape-sized brain, but a human-like face. He turned the paradigm on its head. And boy, did he get in trouble. Did he ever get in trouble? When he published this in 1925 in the journal Nature, the response from his old professors are the most negative responses in science that I've ever read. They so much as said, not that he was wrong, but he was stupid. But he wasn't stupid. He was right. He was right because he told us what came first was not the human brain. That came later, but the human face and the human dentition and the fact that this animal was walking upright. And he could tell because of the way that the spinal cord attaches to the skull. So he told us this. And he told us something else that was really disturbing to people. He found it in Africa. In Africa. Now, wait a minute. In the 1920s, finding something in Africa and saying it was a human ancestor was a little disturbing. And you know what? Do you remember the great expeditions out of the American Museum? And they went over to the Gobi Desert, and they found all those dinosaurs. Roy Chapman Andrews. Well, Roy Chapman Andrews was not looking for dinosaurs. He was looking for humans, because people could deal with Asia, but they couldn't deal with Africa being the cradle of humanity. Well, it was, and Dart told us that. So let's go back. I'm going to give you a little historical context, and then we'll get into talking about Arty, because Arty is a paradigm shift, very much like Dart. And I want to point out that Piltdown was really not proven to be a fraud until the 1950s. That's how long it takes to change the minds of scientists. There's an idea that the old guys that hold these models that they created near and dear to their hearts, they have to die. Once they die, then the new guys can step up with their new models and the science progresses. Now, there's something funny about one of those mammals. What is it? It's not that one of them's carrying a Kalashnikov. It's that he can carry a Kalashnikov. Those guys are doing something that is very strange. What they're doing is they're walking on two limbs. Now, you all think that's normal because you did it today, and you just walked up here today, and you think, gee, that's normal. It's not normal. No other mammal has even experimented with doing this except us and our immediate ancestors. And think about this. The fastest human on the planet, who do I think is appropriately named Bolt? The fastest human on the planet can run in a 100-meter dash 26 miles per hour. And the funny thing is, he hits that about 75 meters through it, and he's decelerating as he crosses the finish line. That's pitiful. Can he catch a rabbit? No. Can he catch a squirrel? No. Can he catch a house cat? No. What can he catch? Slugs? That's about it. So it's a very unusual way to get around. You would never mix these two up. And it's not because camels don't wear argyle socks, but it's because humans stand out among the rest of the mammal world as being strange. And you don't really learn how to walk until you're about 9 years old. It takes a lot of work. And the great deal of it is learned behavior. And how do I know that? Well, I'll tell you how I know that. Because every one of you in this room has your own idiosyncratic gait pattern. You can recognize a friend of yours across a football field by their gait. You can recognize a close friend of yours by the sound of their gait. Now that's weird. You can't do that with any other mammal. All right, the other thing that makes us special are big brains. We really like that, and we do have big brains. Ours is about the 3 times larger than the next largest brain, which is the chimpanzee, which is the second most intelligent animal on the planet. And then finally, tools. The oldest tools that we know about are about 2.6 million years old, and that's, again, an extension of the big brain. Now, I show this, and some of you have seen this, but I show this for this group because I can't use this when I talk to students anymore because they don't get the joke. But I'm going to tell you, this is the plaque that was attached to the Voyager spaceship. Carl Sagan was involved in doing this. And it was attached to the spaceship, and then that was sent out from Earth. It went around Jupiter and shot out, and it's now further out in space than any machine we've ever sent out there. And the idea was, if there is an intelligent life form out there, and they find this, they can look at this thing, and they can say, there's a pulsar, and they can triangulate off of that. There's our solar system. There's the Voyager on a slingshot trajectory. And then there's these weirdos. Now, NASA took this to Congress because even today NASA has its hand out to Congress. So they took it to show off and show them that they were going to do this. Well, number one, that was meant to be solid gold. Well, they ran out of money, so it's aluminum that's coated in gold. So if anybody does find it, they're going to say, these humans are pretty cheap. Now, number two, they showed this to Congress. And this is why I'm bringing this up, because it tells us something about how the human brain does work. There was a congressman from North Carolina. His name is Jesse Helms. Jesse died recently, too bad. But some of you remember Jesse. And Jesse was, let's just say, a little on the right side of politics. Jesse took a look at this, and he said, and I quote, "I will not be a party to the pandering of pornography in space." Now, does that not say something about how the human mind works? If someone found it, they're going to look at this and say, there goes the neighborhood, look at those naked humans. He made such a stink about this that he wouldn't let them attach it to the Voyager unless they made a change in the female anatomy. So whoever finds it, if somebody does find it, they're going to say, well, we figure that's a manipulatory organ. Okay. And they're standing on this, and that must be a locomotor organ. Okay. We're not sure what that is. He doesn't seem to manipulate anything with it, and he's not walking on it. But we can't see any place to use it. So they literally changed human anatomy to send it out to space, thinking if anybody finds it, they won't be insulted. Okay, well, enough of that. Let's get to the science of this. Talk about a paradigm shift. This is, of course, Charles Darwin, who published Origin of Species in 1859. And that was probably, in my opinion, the greatest scientific paradigm shift in the history of humans. Huge. It's modified the way we view everything. And as I mentioned, he had no fossils, really, so he had to depend upon comparative anatomy. Remember, we've only got those two kits, those two pieces, that we can do comparative anatomy or fossils. He depended on comparative anatomy because it's really all he had. And this happens to be, this is a famous slide by an anatomist named Adolf Schultz, who took the four great apes, the orangutan, the chimp, the gorilla, and the human, and he shaved them and he put them in what's called standard anatomical position. Now, I'm going to tell you that I could take this animal, the chimpanzee, and I could put it in the medical school, and the medical students could use their Gray's Anatomy and their Grant's dissectors, and they would never know the difference. That's how close we are to that animal in terms of comparative anatomy. Now we've taken comparative anatomy to the resolution of this stuff, to DNA, literally to individual base pairs. But don't let it fool you. It's still comparative anatomy. And what we have found is that chimpanzees and humans are 98.5% identical in our DNA. When I was going to graduate school, we thought chimpanzees and gorillas, because, gee, they sure do look a lot alike, were closer to each other than they are to humans. That's not so. We now know that chimps and humans are closer to each other than either is to the gorilla. That's a paradigm shift. That's a scary thought. But don't get too concerned about it, because you're 60% identical to a fruit fly and 40% identical to a sea cucumber. So this DNA stuff is very conservative. And I'm going to tell you something right up front right now. From the 1990s, when all this was being done, people studying human evolution, particularly those of us that were looking for fossils, the paleontology piece, we were seduced by this, absolutely seduced by this. And as I go on, I'm going to tell you why. Because it told us that we were almost chimpanzees, and chimpanzees are almost us. So whether we wanted to or not, it was implicit in our models that we had derived from all this information that a chimpanzee is a surrogate primitive human. And we all started to use the modern-day chimpanzee as though they were little Australopithecines. And we looked at them, and we looked at their hands, and we say, gee, they knuckle walk, so early humans must have knuckle walked. And gee, look at them, look at their shoulders and their thorax and their backbones and their knees and their feet. That's the model that we all used. And I'm guilty. I'm as guilty as anyone. I did it too. We made a polarity with humans over here and chimpanzees over here, and we said, that's the primitive one, the chimp, and there's the human. And we put Australopithecus somewhere in the middle, and we tried to figure it out. Well, we were wrong. We were very wrong, and we'll get to that. Nevertheless, meet your first cousins. Your first biological cousins. That's a pygmy chimp. That's a common chimp. But Darwin was interested in talking about the similarities because he had a skeptical audience. His colleagues in the lay public said, Darwin, we don't believe you. So he had, and his colleagues, Huxley, had to make the case for the great, great similarities between humans and the apes. That was an important piece. So since 1959, we have been concentrating on how we look like chimps. That's important because we do. But his argument was based upon similarities, and the reason he did that is he needed a convincing argument. But these guys don't look that much alike. None of you have a brain that size. None of you have the big canine teeth or the hair all over the body like that. None of you knuckle walked into this room, I don't think. So there are differences. So maybe it's time to start asking that question. What makes us different? All right, tool number 2 in our toolbox, the fossils. Because of Dart in 1924, when he found that Tong specimen in South Africa, focus shifted over to Africa. It took a long time, literally till the 1950s, when people were willing to accept that. Then in 1959, Mary Leakey discovers a skull, some of you can remember, called the Nutcracker Man, or Zinjanthropus, that was on the cover of National Geographic. Boy, do I remember when I was a kid, that was the most exciting thing I ever saw. And I said, wow, that's really neat stuff. And that shifted the focus out of South Africa to East Africa. Now, East Africa, we're lucky for 2 reasons. One, the animals we're looking for live there. Number 2, we can find them. And how do we find them? Well, the reason we can find them is because at this particular area of the earth, you've got a huge cleft running north, which is part of the Great Rift System. So you've got the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, and then a third cleft coming down the coast of Africa, which is the Great African Rift. Eventually that will fill in with the ocean, and that will become a big island. That means we've got exposures. And that is very, very important because you can actually find the fossils. Most of you probably, well, some of you probably know, but most of you probably don't, that you're sitting in a building that has more fossil sharks and placoderm fish from about 380 million years ago than any place on the planet. Cleveland is famous for our fossil sharks and that great big Dunkleosteus fish. Famous. They're all over the world, but they all come from Cleveland. Has anyone ever found one? I haven't, and I've looked. Because around here, the only place you can go to find them is you have to go to a river cut. So you go to the Chagrin River, or you can go to the Cuyahoga River in certain areas where you have outcrops, and you can look and see if you can find these fish. But the exposures are pretty bad. So you can't find them very often. Well, here there are enormous exposures that will let you find the fossils. And when you're up at the top, up at the escarpment at the rift, it's really nice. This happens to be in Ethiopia. This is the top, and you're up about 11,000 feet. It's cool, it's moist, it's very nice, it's green. So you jump in your Land Cruiser, and you bump down that escarpment to get to the basement of the rift, which is about 1,000 foot in elevation. It takes you about a day to get there, and when you get there, keep in mind what that looks like. Welcome. It's a vacation, a holiday spot. There are no trees, there's no grass, there's essentially no water. It's one of the hottest places on the planet. It's 110 degrees every day at noon. But it's a beautiful place to find fossils because you don't have all those pesky bushes and grass to get in the way. You walk up and down these areas looking for fossils that are outcropping. And when you get down there, you find these guys. These are the off-hard tribesmen. And they follow their herds of camels and goats from waterhole to waterhole. And you notice this guy is a member of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. And how do you find fossils? People always want to know, have you got anything new? Isn't there some machine that'll help you find fossils? No, there's not. We're finding them the old-fashioned way. You walk, and you walk, and you walk, and you look for fossils on the ground. And if you're lucky, you'll find a fossil, and then you can walk up this little gully, and if you're really lucky, you can find out where it's coming out of that wall. And then you can excavate into that wall. But spend most of your time just looking at your shoes. And you find a lot of these things. Big fossils. This happens to be a 4 million year old elephant femur or thigh bone. Find a lot of those because the old hyenas and the modern day hyenas can't process bones like that. And if you go to the Serengeti, you still find a bunch of elephant stuff because they're big. This is a particularly interesting one. That's the fossil. That's the modern day. That is the humerus or the upper arm bone. This one of a modern day river otter. That is a 3.5 million year old river otter. Now, do you think, we reconstruct this to be about the size of a black bear. Do you think it lived in a desert? Unlikely. Do you think it lived in anything close to a desert? No. And we should have known this anyway. Do you remember those ideas about humans are adapted to the savannah? It's a very popular idea. It came right out of South Africa. It was Dart's idea originally. And the idea is that, you know, on the savannah you have clumps of trees. And if you've been to South Africa and you go out on the veldt, what happens is you've got a clump of trees, and that literally means it's limestone, so you have a pool that's holding water, which is why the trees are there. Then, you know, from a mile away you can see another clump of trees. And if you go over there, there'll be another pool and a little cave. And that's where they actually find the fossils, are in these caves. So the idea was, that Raymond Dart came up with, was, okay, you're in a little clump of trees, and you run out of food. All right? You run out of food. So what are you going to do? Well, you can look over there, and you can see another clump. And you say, okay, let's get out of this tree, and we're going to walk from this point over to that point and go get some more food. So for some unexplained reason, instead of staying on all fours where you can run fast to get to the other clump of trees before the leopards get you, we stood up so the leopards could see us and we couldn't run very fast anymore. I don't get that. But at any rate, that's why he said we stood up, was to walk to the other clump of trees. And then there's a savanna hypothesis, blah, blah, blah. Well, forget it. You can throw that away. Even more so now that we have Arty. Because you and I require constant water. We are not desert rats. And we should have known this. In fact, we did know this. But some old chestnuts just won't die. And you know how I can tell you this? Is because not just that we find fossils that are around the water, and this is what it would have been like when Lucy was alive, but if you look at a human kidney, and a human kidney, the way we concentrate water, I won't go into it, is we have these things called loops of Henle, and they work for calorie current exchange. But if you want to talk about it later, we can. Now, you can tell how good an animal is by looking at the length of its loops of Henle, how good it is at concentrating urine. So, who's the king of concentrating urine? Desert rats, the little kangaroo rats. Boy, can they do it well. They don't even drink water. They just get it from the plants that they eat. And when they urinate a paste. Now, I don't know about you, but that hurts to think about. Well, we certainly can't do that. Indeed, we can't concentrate urine well at all. And if I was to take one of you and put you in a closet, close the door and lock it, turn up the thermostat to 110 degrees, and leave you there for 3 days, when I came back, wouldn't be pretty. And what would have killed you? I know, heat prostration. Well, but let's take it a step lower than that. You know what killed you? You sweated to cool off because it was so hot. It's the only way a human can cool off is through perspiration. That means you lose your water and you lose your electrolytes. It's a bad way to cool off, really. But that's the only way we got it. So you sweat out all your water, and eventually your blood becomes so thick, so viscous, because you lost all your fluid, that your heart can't push it anymore, and you die of heart failure. And that's what kills you. So humans require constant water, and this is what our ancestors grew up around. And 3.2 million years ago, in a place like this, an animal was killed by a leopard. We know that because there's a puncture wound in the pelvis. The leopard took her into a tree, but before the leopard could consume her, and I say her, she dropped out of the tree, hit a braided stream like this, was covered before the crocs got her, And in 1974, on that site right there, that's what it looks like today. Tom Gray, I'm not getting a, uh-oh, it's not moving. Okay, well, I'm just going to say, in 1974, a graduate student from Case Western Reserve named Tom Gray discovered an animal on this very site. And as soon as we're able to move that, and that animal is the most famous fossil of all time. We all know her. Her name is Lucy. And Lucy is the most famous and the most researched fossil of all time, and the most argued fossil of all time. Remember, she's 3.2 million years old. When she was first found, she was the oldest thing we had. Why is she so important? Well, that, of course, is part of it. But a big piece of it is the fact that we have joints that we never had before. We have a complete hip joint. We have a sacroiliac joint. We can mirror image a knee. We have a complete ankle joint, a complete elbow joint, a shoulder joint, and joints up and down the spine. That's phenomenal for something that old. I can tell you how tall she was. She's about 3.5 foot tall, weighed about 60 or 70 pounds, and was, judging from her teeth, was probably on the order of about 20 years old. But the big question is, how does she walk? How did she walk? That's the big question, because if she's down on all fours, she's not one of us. Well, fortunately, bipedality, walking upright, requires enormous changes in the skeleton. From your neck down, in fact, arguably your head too, from your neck down, every single bone in your body has been modified to permit you to walk upright. One of the major places is the knee. I don't know what's happening behind me. Pay no attention. Okay, do the man behind the curtain. All right. One of the things about us, and again, you never thought about this, but if you go home and look at your dog or your cat, you'll see, every single one of you is knock-kneed. You think, what? You're knock-kneed. Your knees are closer together than your hips are. I mean, think about it. We all notice that once you think about it. And the reason we do that is so you can stand on one foot and you can balance yourself on one foot, because as a biped, you're on one foot at a time. And instead of falling over, because you should fall over, you have to get your foot underneath your center of mass, and that allows you to stand on one foot, which incidentally, I told you how slow we are. We are very slow. Go home and look at your dog or cat, and you can say, yeah, you can beat me in a foot race, but stand on one foot. Humans are the only mammals that can stand on one foot. And one of the ways we do it, there's the fossil, that's the knee, that's the shin bone, that's the thigh bone. See how the thigh bone slants out to the side, out to the hip? There's a human, slants off to the side. Look at the chimp, straight up. So that's one of the easy ways to tell how the animal walked. And this has important, we don't have time to go into it, but forensic implications and also biomechanical implications, because women have broader pelvises because of the birth canal, which is another weird human trait, which means that angle is steeper in a woman than it is in a man. And that means that the big muscle on the front of your thigh, the quadricep, that comes down and attaches right there on a bone that's missing, the patella, pulls at a greater angle in women than it does in men. And that's why women have more trouble with their knees than men do. Oops. Now, we also have Lucy's pelvis. That's her sacrum, the bottom of the spine, the vertebral column. That's the hip bone, and that's the sacroiliac joint. We can mirror image that. There's Lucy, and there's a modern-day chimp. They don't look much alike. So there's our chimp. Look how tall those blades are, and there's Lucy. Compare her to a modern human. There's a modern human. There's Lucy. So by 3.2 million, she had made the primary changes in the pelvis that had to be made in order to allow her to walk upright. Now, I'm going to tell you something about evolution. If I was to ask you, and some of you I'm sure could probably pull this together, I said, explain to me, describe what an evolutionary adaptation is. And some of you could say, well, it's any anatomical, physiological, or behavioral characteristic that in a given environment increases the reproductive fitness of the organism in question. Woo! I'd give you the A, but what did I just say? What I just said is this. You have to live, an adaptation is anything that lets you live long enough to get your genes through that pelvis. That's it. Because if it doesn't help you have babies, it's not an adaptation. Well, having said that, you certainly don't go and willy-nilly move these bones around, because if you've ever looked at and taken human anatomy, you know inside of this thing, there's a lot of stuff. And you've got intestines, and you have ovaries, and if you're a man, you have a prostate, and you've got bladders, and all kinds of stuff. And you just don't willy-nilly move it around. So why did Lucy go through all those changes? Well, this is why. If you're walking on all fours like this chimpanzee, those muscles on the back of your thigh, which are called the gluteal muscles, which are humans' favorite muscles, I might add, because when you can talk to third graders, which I periodically do. In fact, this weekend I talked to a bunch of third graders, and when you do it and you ask them what muscle's this, they don't know, but why should they? Or what muscle's this? They don't know. But if I slap my wallet, I would say probably 70% of them scream out gluteus maximus. Now that doesn't tell you much about human anatomy, but it tells you enormous amounts about human behavior. But that's another lecture. And these guys, when they contract that muscle, and remember muscles can only pull, they can't push, they cause the thigh bone to go backwards, to extend. And as long as the foot is on the ground, that's the galloping complex. That's why they're such fast runners. Well, when we stood up, we lost that. And what we have done is to take two of those gluteal muscles, minimus and medius, and we moved it to the side of our hip. It's not behind the hip anymore, it's to the side. And now it permits you to abduct, which is to say go like this, pull your leg off to the side, to abduct your thigh. Now, this is one of my pet peeves in teaching anatomy. Those of you that took anatomy did what I did and what all students will for eternity do. You took 3x5 cards and you put the name of the muscle on the top, and then you put its origin, and then you put its insertion, and you put its innervation, and then you put its function, and you memorize it. Now, when you look at the function of gluteus minimus and medius, every anatomy text in the world says it's abduction of the thigh. And I don't want to pull these wires, but that's to pull your leg to the side. Okay, I got to give you the A once again. That's true, that's what it does. But are you going to tell me that you went to all the trouble to change your pelvis and move all that stuff around and ruin your birth canal on and on and on so you can do this? I don't think so. Unless you have a peculiar dog-like habit, you probably don't do that very often. So why did we do it? Well, the reason is because when you stand on one foot, those muscles contract and they hold you up so you don't fall over. And when you walk out of here today, put your fingers on the sides of your hip and you can feel those muscles contract every step you take. They're very important muscles. So by Lucy, in terms of historical context, we knew by 3.2 million, Lucy was walking upright like us. You'd have thought, if you saw her from a distance, Lucy was a kid, a 3.5 foot tall child. And you wouldn't have known the difference in her gait. She did not walk like a chimpanzee. She had changed her pelvis. She changed her knee. She changed everything. In fact, Lucy told us almost nothing. I mean, this is what's so amazing now in hindsight. Lucy was so adapted to walking upright that she didn't tell us, didn't even give us a hint at what came before her. Now, that's odd for me to say that, but because I spent a career studying Lucy. But she is so far advanced that we didn't know what came ahead. Enter Ardipithecus. 1992. This is a site where Arty was found. This is what it looks like. And these are 3 different areas where Ardipithecus bones were found. This is where the skeleton was found. You can see the excavation point right there. And I want to point out the person who discovered the skeleton. And this skeleton is a game changer. That's what I'm getting to. It has changed things enormously. And it was discovered by Johannes Haile Selassie, and he found a hand bone. And I want you to know, I was standing about 5 foot from him when he found it. And that's Johannes there in the back. So, couldn't you have just thrown it down, Johannes, and said, Bruce, there's a bone over there? This is phenomenally important. So much so that it made the cover of Science magazine. It also made Breakthrough of the Year in Science magazine. Let's just quickly take a look at Arty. This is Arty's skull. The reconstruction of the skull tells us that she had a brain that was chimpanzee size, not even an intelligent chimp. Call it 340 cc's, 350 cc's, a chimp-sized brain. But there's something odd about it. Number one is that, we'll get to this, the dental complex. Arty is 4.4 million years old, over 1 million years older than Lucy. And although Lucy didn't tell us much about the development of gait, boy oh boy, Arty did, and will continue to. First of all, these are teeth. That's a chimpanzee, and that's its big canine. There's Arty, and there's a human. All male primates have big canines. You can see the size, it's like a tusk. The reason that they have big canines is the males, they don't eat meat. It's not like your dog. They don't use them to kill things. They're big, big teeth, and they use them to fight. They fight with they fight for access to females. So the males fight each other, and the male that has the largest canine can win, and therefore he gets access to the females. Now, that chimpanzee canine is huge, and not only is it huge, but it rubs against that tooth just below it, the premolar in the lower jaw, just below it, and it hones, it sharpens itself. So it's a continuously sharpening saber. Look at humans. Of course, ours is greatly, greatly reduced. Take a look at Arty. There's the canine. Not at all like a chimpanzee, and it's lost that honing mechanism, that sharpening mechanism, because it no longer uses it like that. So by 4.4 million, Arty had already, the males had already reduced the size of their canine teeth, which means the males are not competing in a traditional primate fashion. That's a major thing. You know what that also tells us? Oops, our chimpanzee model, bad model. We shouldn't have used it in the first place, but we were. Arty told us it was a mistake. Arty looks more like this strange animal, which is us. On the bottom are molar teeth, and they're just highlighted in colors to give you some idea about molar or about enamel thickness. And what in this scheme, green and blue means thin enamel, orange and red means thicker enamel. So a chimpanzee has thin enamel, Arty has intermediate enamel thickness, and then humans have thick enamel, which means that Arty had already made a transition to at least eating some of its food resources from the ground that would have a lot of grit. So the enamel had to be thicker. This is an important one. Remember I told you that the idea was that early human ancestors knuckle walked? And if you watch apes, and if I don't have time to explain it, but if any of you would like to talk about why chimpanzees knuckle walk, we could talk about that later, because that's just as weird as walking upright. But chimpanzees walk on the back of their fingers, like this. If you go to the zoo, take a look at them. It's a strange way to get around. Well, for years we thought, people have made the supposition that early hominids must have knuckle walked too. Well, no. You can throw that one out too. Arty tells us that's not at all the case. The Arty hand was not capable of knuckle walking. And what's more, the Arty hand was able, when in a tree, was able to go put the palm down. Chimps cannot really do that very well. Arty could do that the way you and I can do. You know what that means? Throw away the knuckle walking model. That no longer is true. It also means that you and I have a more primitive hand than a chimpanzee. So remember that model I told you about, the chimps over here and the humans over here? Oops, we were wrong. How to Arty walk? Well, what do we know about walking? These are the Laetoli footprints from Tanzania. It's right on the edge of the Serengeti Plain. And what happened is a big volcano ejected ash. 3 of our ancestors, like Lucy, walked across that ash that had been slightly wetted by rain, walked across it, then the volcano ejected more ash and covered it until Mary Leakey's team found it. This is truly an amazing, amazing fossil find. That's a little specimen about the size of Lucy. So right, left, right, left, right, left. A larger specimen followed her, probably about a meter behind. And then a third specimen followed that one and stepped in its footprints. So that you have superimposition of the footprints. What do they look like? Well, do they look like they were made by this? No. Every single primate known, other than humans and our immediate ancestors, has a grasping big toe. And I know no one in this room has a toe like that. Because if you do, you're not a human. So, and you know, buying shoes would just be a problem. They have them because they're arboreal. They climb in trees. And if you climb in trees, you want to have a powerful, strong foot to hold on to the branches. Because if you fall out of the canopy up 60 foot, 70 foot, you're not going to contribute to the next generation. So they have these big, powerful, big toes. That's just an x-ray to show you what a chimpanzee big toe looks like. Now, there's a weird foot. That's a human foot. And we're looking at it from, that's your ankle bone or talus. That's the heel bone. And then, of course, these are your toes. The reason I show this is there's something here that's strange. An arch. No other mammal has an arch to its foot. That's unique to us. That's a weird thing. In fact, that's why we took the big toe and we put it in line with the rest of our toes to allow us to have an arch. Now, why would you do that? I think having a grasping big toe would be kind of cool. But we can't do it. And the reason we can't do it is we had to create the arch. And the reason we had to create the arch to our foot is that when we walk bipedally, you're hitting on one foot at a time. And you're concentrating all that force on one foot at a time. When you are walking at a fast walk, you can put 3 to 4 times your body weight through your foot. 3 to 4 times your body weight. That is huge. And if you think about how little those bones are, we should be fracturing bones in our feet every time we take a step. But we don't. Why not? And there's another way you could test this. If I was to stand on a chair and jump off the chair and hit on my foot, I should break all those bones, but I don't. However, if I took your foot and I put it on the ground and I jumped off the chair and I landed on your foot, it would break your bones. What's going on there? Where's that energy going? Well, that's a wonderful thing about muscles. They work for us and they're shock absorbers. And we've taken all these little tiny muscles in the sole of your foot, and you have more muscles in the sole of your foot than you do in your hand. And you can do this with your fingers, but you can't do this with your foot. And the reason those little tiny muscles are in there is that they elongate when you step on the arch, they flatten out the arch, and they take up that energy and they turn it into heat. And your body can deal with heat. It doesn't like mechanical energy, but it can deal with the heat. That's why your feet sweat. I can tell that doesn't keep you awake at night, wondering, why do my feet sweat so much? Well, that's why. Now, I could go into calling this eccentric contraction and all that kind of stuff, because physiologically we could talk about this. But you know what? The Romans knew this. The Egyptians knew this. The Sumerians knew this. You know why I can tell you that? Because if you have flat feet, you couldn't join the Roman or the Egyptian infantry. Because flat-footed people don't have this device to absorb energy, and what happens with them is literally on a forced march with a backpack on their back, they develop fractures, what are called fatigue fractures, through the little bones in the foot and also the bones of your shin and the little bone on the side of your shin. And then you're not good to anybody. So that's, even today, if you've got flat feet, you can't join the infantry. And here is one of those feet from Laetoli, one of the footprints. There's the heel, there's the arch to the foot, and there's the big toe. So by 3.7 million years ago, we have animals like Lucy that have essentially the same footprint as you and I. You would lose that footprint on a modern-day beach. Incidentally, is that a great-looking foot or what? That's a highly evolved foot if ever I've seen one. Look at Arty's foot. Whoa. All right. Did Arty have an arch? No. Arty's got the big toe sticking off to the side, still climbing trees. But when she came down and she started walking around on the ground, she walked on 2 feet. How do I know that? Well, I know that because we can look at the joints across this area and we can see that she was walking on 2 feet, but not using her big toe. She did not have an arch to her foot. We have no modern analog to this animal. We've never seen anything like this. So she would have been walking on her lateral 4 digits in a very awkward fashion. And because she didn't have an arch, I can tell you she wasn't walking very far and wasn't running. So we found that transitional animal. Now another thing here. There are pieces in this foot, I don't have time to go into it, but pieces in this foot that are more like your foot and mine than they are like a chimpanzee. In fact, we now know, since Arty, that the chimpanzee has evolved a foot that is completely different than the last common ancestor between us and chimps. Arty has a mechanism through here that works the way yours and mine does not work the way a chimpanzee does. And I just show this to say there's human, there's the chimpanzee. The chimpanzee foot is adapted to walking up and down vertical substrates. And in order to do that, the chimp has had to take the front of the foot, the grasping part, and, if you will, kind of separate it from the back of the foot, which is the propulsive part. So a chimpanzee can actually has an axis, a line through its midfoot that allows it to flex. You and I can't do that. Neither could Arty. But chimps do. So chimps have actually evolved further in their foot anatomy than you and I have. So, what does Arty tell us? Well, I started out by saying Darwin spent his career and subsequent careers after him looking to identify similarities between humans and the great apes. The reason they did that is they had an argument to make, and their argument was, we've got to show that humans are not unique, that humans are mammals, they are primates, and they are hominoids. They are very much like the great apes. Because of that, and subsequently after that, because of the genetic information that came out in the 1990s to tell us how close we are to chimpanzees, we all said, whoa, gee whiz, we are really close to chimps. So we began to construct our models. We should have known better. But you know, it's seductive. We began to construct our models as though chimpanzees were over here and they were surrogates for our ancestors. And that humans have evolved much, much further than the chimp has from the last common ancestor. We were wrong. We were wrong. This is the paradigm shift. We no longer can say that. We now know that your shoulder, your torso, your elbow, your hand, your foot, your pelvis, your knee are much more like the last common ancestor than is the chimpanzees. They have evolved much further in those regards, in those anatomical areas, than you and me. So we can no longer just use the old paradigm. There's been the shift. And this is new. And I told you that with Dart, it took 4, 5 decades to let the science finally catch up. Well, Arty's going to do that. Arty is literally going to take 5 decades and thousands of graduate students poring over these skeletons to determine what our new model should be. But Arty is a paradigm shift. Quickly, that's the pelvis of a chimp, Lucy. This is Arty. I just want to go through this quickly. Arty looks much more like Lucy. However, It has that abductor complex on the side, so we know that she could stand on one foot, which is pretty amazing in and of itself. But the back of the pelvis is still chimpanzee-like. There's a chimp. That's where the hamstring muscles attach. That's Lucy. That's human. That's the same as us. Look at these. Those look much more like a chimpanzee. However, Arty does have on the top this bump here, anterior inferior iliac spine, which is unique to hominids. So the upper Arty pelvis looks very much like us, but the lower pelvis still is adapted for tree climbing. So we have found that transitional animal. That's just to show that that pelvis, the iliac blade, is shortened, not at all elongated the way it is in a chimpanzee. She's also turned those blades around to permit that abductor mechanism. That's the primitive area in Arty. Still looks like a chimpanzee. That's just to show that those muscles on the side of your hip work in Arty the same way they do in you and I. So what does all this tell us? Ultimately, what it tells us is this. Arty is getting close at 4.4 million to the last common ancestor between chimps and humans. We have been working under the assumption, under the model, the paradigm, that that's the primitive animal that we could use to model this animal. We were wrong. We're not permitted to do that anymore. So the paradigm shift is occurring. It'll take 40 years to find out how it all happens. So if I'm wrong, I don't care. Thank you, Arty. Thank you, Charles Darwin, for helping us figure this out. Thank you, Johannes Haile Selassie, for finding this fossil. And this is the old model. We all, from Time Life. We all remember this. This got me into this field in the first place. And we're going back to the brain. Brains don't like big change. They like little incremental change. And gosh, we all like that. That was such a fun thing. It didn't work like that, though. It didn't even work close to that. There's a punctuated event. We end up with mosaic evolution. Things are much more complex than we thought. And some people knew that. They knew it before. So thank you very much, and what a long, strange trip it has been. Thanks.